So welcome to our session today from the Performance Coach, entitled "What do I need to know and what do I need to do when I'm asked to coach a team?" So this is the first part of a two-part series around team coaching, which is an area that's gaining a lot of momentum in organizations. It's an area of interest for a lot of executive coaches now in terms of applying the skills more broadly in terms of a team and group context. And that's really what we're going to be doing today, is laying some foundations around what team coaching is. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. So just to let you know that this session is going to be facilitated by myself, Damien Wamfraw. I'm a partner at the Performance Coach. I head up our coach training programs, both our public programs and in-house, and I'll be joined by my colleague Chris Sheepshanks. And Chris heads up our team coaching provision, so both in terms of the work we do in organizations, but also our team coach training program, which is launching in March this year. So just a bit briefly about Chris. He's been an executive and team coach for over 10 years now. Background was in the British Army. Currently he's working with a great deal of senior leadership teams and boards across the UK in the private and public sector, and is really the expert in our faculty around team coaching. So Chris is really going to be giving us his wisdom and expertise today, and I'm going to be facilitating a conversation with Chris around this whole topic. So in terms of today, these are the areas that we're going to be looking at, really, which is starting off trying to explore the differences and the similarities between individual one-to-one work and when we're working with groups and teams. So we're calling it team coaching, but it will be in reference to groups and teams. And I'm sure we'll get on to that conversation in a short while as well. We're going to touch on contracting. You know, the ABC of coaching is always be contracting. So we're going to be looking at contracting in the group and team context. We're going to be exploring a recognized team coaching process, helping you to start to reflect on what you may be working with if you are moving more into supporting groups and teams through your work as a coach. We're going to be clarifying really what we see as the objectives for a team coaching intervention. And we're going to be exploring really how we as coaches can support these two aspects of teaming. So team function, we can call that the task, the what, and also the effectiveness in terms of their cohesiveness. We could call that the how as well. We're going to be giving you a definition around team coaching, and also a framework as well in terms of working with a team. So that's the agenda for the next hour. Just in terms of some housekeeping, you know, really important to try and minimize distractions as much as possible. So would really encourage you to shut down any additional applications that you may have open, only because this does sometimes impact on the transmission speed. So it may impact on the way that you're receiving the webinar today. Would also suggest having a pen and paper handy. You will be sent the recording of this webinar after the session, but you may want to capture some thoughts and notes as we go through. And we want to try and make this interactive. So you may have seen the Q&A box on your toolbar, you know, and if you do have any questions you would like to raise with Chris during a session, please feel free to use the Q&A box as well. So the final part of the setup for this session is really helping you think about yourself and starting with some outcomes in terms of what you're hoping to get from this session around team coaching. So the first question I really want to raise with you is, how present are you for this session? So just thinking about, you know, getting the most from today, how present are you right now? And thinking about that, what do you need to do to get most out of this session? So maybe closing your office door or shutting down your email, but what else might you need to do to get the most out of this session today? So just spend a moment just reflecting on that question. And then finally, thinking about the agenda I've just outlined, what is your primary learning objective for this session? And you may have more than one. So if that's the case, what are your learning objectives for this session? Thinking about yourself as a coach and maybe a team coach. So what are you hoping to get from the session today? So let's move into the session. So Chris, the first question I thought we could explore around this topic is around, the individual context, working as a one-to-one coach to working as a team coach. So thinking about the similarities, the differences, what are your thoughts around that as an initial start point? And I've got some slides that I prepared based on our initial conversation to support this piece as well. So what are your thoughts around that, Chris?
Great, thank you. Well, thank you to everybody for taking some time again to be here today. In answer to the question, I would put forward a proposition that I think there's an enormous amount of perhaps myths and legends that emerge around team coaching. And some of that we're going to try to explore and even explode a bit today. But the proposition I put forward to you that actually, if we're really thinking about team coaching, there are an enormous amount of similarities and principles and qualities that you just perhaps need to hold are true in both contexts. So just actually remembering that as a team coach, I am there to enable other people to take responsibility. It's not about me fixing the problem. It is about how do I support a team and within the team context, a wider organization, to actually focus on what they need to do, to clarify their thinking, to gain perspective, to recognize they have choice, and to take responsibility for the choices they're making. I still need to create what you might call a safe space in which they can work effectively and well. I still need to create rapport and support, and having done that and built a sense of trust, to use it well by challenging and creating a sense of rigor in the conversation that actually helps the team to move on. I need to support the team just as I would with an individual to get clear on what they want to get from the intervention. And in a team environment, to also look beyond it in terms of the wider stakeholders, and remembering that in an individual assignment, there will also be wider stakeholders who will benefit from this coaching. Your team, your colleagues, your line reports, your boss, the organization, and actually just beginning to schedule the work, beginning to agree that there is a set number of sessions booked in advance, and that's built around a live environment in terms of bringing their live experiences, their attitudes, their behaviors, how they've been working between sessions into the work we do. And just in that sense, really inviting all of the coaches who are on this webinar to remember to appreciate all that they already bring, all that they already do, all your capacity and ability in a one-to-one setting to really support an individual to shift their awareness and their perspective and work effectively. Enabling them to create great understanding and focus, create mobility, facilitate greater trust, engagement, commitment. And that's still your job. It's still just the same in a team environment as it is in an individual environment.
So, sorry, Chris, carry on.
No, I was just about to get carried away, so I love your question.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, and I understand the similarities, but you know, there are going to be some differences between the two fields in a way. So what is different is the next question.
Well, before we actually just look at some of the ideas we worked and have experienced in the past, the first difference, actually, I just want to recognize, if you think about sitting in front of your coachee on a one-to-one basis, thinking back in time to that early stages in your coach training when there was an energy or an expectation that you felt you had to fix their problem. And the first perhaps part to recognize is what happens to anyone when they're not just in front of one person but a group. One of the things we do with a team when we're training team coaches is we get them to stand up and face the rest of the group. And there is a different energy there. There is a different expectation and different thoughts about what we need or should do. And team coaching has perhaps some wider context. There are a wider number of variables, a wider number of opinions and attitudes and behaviors to deal with in the team. Perhaps most of all, there is a much broader contracting process. So there's a need not just to contract with an individual and perhaps their sponsor or line manager, but a contract with the team leader, the team itself, and wherever you can, the wider stakeholders that are actually around that team, that broad set of interests that hold expectations and assumptions about what that team is for, what it needs to do, what it isn't there to do, who it should be talking to, what it should be delivering in terms of outcomes and outputs. Confidentiality can be more complex, both in terms of the team and the wider stakeholders. I'm doing some programs at the moment where it's been commissioned by the board and I'm working with the exec team. How you manage that confidentiality when they ring you up and say, actually, how effective is this being and how good is this person and how good is that person? How do you ensure that you're both supporting the sponsor in terms of the work they want to do, but you're also holding the trust and ethics around supporting the team itself and some of the team members? And going on, there's some other pieces which I need to think about in terms of, it can be hard enough sometimes on an individual basis, helping somebody clarify what they really want. Even harder in a team environment to get an agreement that is a true agreement between a mix of individuals, all who have their own opinions and thoughts and ideas and preferences, building that sense of consensus, not in terms of just what they want, but also how they're going to do it. There's a piece also in terms of building a greater sense of trust in doing so, not just with individual members who you might have a relationship with, but also with the wider team, creating an environment where actually they can build some greater trust together, have some trust in you in the process. Managing that wonderful swirl of dynamics that can occur in any group of sense of inclusion or exclusion, what I can say, what I can't say, what I feel I've got to hold back on, the topics that are the holy cows or the big elephants in the room, how I manage that relationship and the emotional charge that can be around it. Recognizing there's also a sort of mix of roles and responsibilities around that. Actually, who's doing what and how. Not only what people are accountable for, but also what they feel responsible for, even if it's not in their area. How they make decisions. Recognizing actually most decision-making processes are often very unclear, particularly in the team environment. And a recognition that actually not all decisions can be made together. There maybe need to be some sense where actually I recognize that we can't be interdependent on everything, but what are the places we are interdependent on? And this place where actually I'm holding a group of individuals at some level to account, ensuring they remember their wider role and responsibilities, not just for their task, but for their place in their organization, and with executive teams and boards to a whole mass of wider stakeholders. And how do they manage the tensions between that and understand who actually is their ultimate client, the ultimate person that they're serving. I've downloaded a whole lot of mass of stuff there, Damien. Does that make sense as you're hearing it?
Yeah, no, it does. And I'm reflecting on the transition from being a one-to-one executive coach to working with and I keep calling groups and teams, but let's just call it a team in terms of the work here. So Chris, I'm just interested in, so what would your advice be? So if I was a coach and I was really interested in making the move, as I look at that list there around what's different and also thinking about what's the same, what advice would you be giving somebody that wants to move into this type of work in terms of what would support them to do that?
I would ask them to start appreciating what they already know.
Mm-mm.
So all those who are experienced and have good experience in terms of one-to-one coaching, you will have a process. You will have an intricate understanding of actually what will make a real difference for that individual. The need to contract more broadly, not just with the individual, but around it, to think of a wider system context. About getting clear about what people want, what they need, helping them clarify in those first sessions, leading out of the contracting session in terms of what's required. Understanding the expectations of others on them helps you develop the public goals that help you develop the private goals. So really begin to just ground what you already know, and please appreciate that. And take some of those principles and apply them to the team environment. So, one of the things we wanted to talk about here was contracting. But even now, before we look at it in a bit more detail, just think for yourself, who would I contract with in an individual assignment? And what would be my reasons for that? How do I translate that into a team environment? Who do I need to contract with? Who do they need to contract with? How do I actually bring a greater sense of understanding of what's required of this individual that would frame a public goal for this intervention? Appreciate that they actually already have a huge amount of experience of being in teams, working with teams. They've probably done it all their lives. What works? What doesn't work? What are the behaviors and attitudes that really help? What are the things which don't really help? Really actually mine your own knowledge and mine your own understanding. Does that make sense, as I said?
Yeah, no, it does. It does, Chris. And at the same time, I'm still interested in just pushing you a bit more in terms of, so to build the capacity to work with a team and deal with the different needs, the different variables that you spoke about, as well as obviously attending to the process of the work you do with them. How have you built the capacity? So what's really worked for you that's enabled you to make that step as well? So in terms of, I suppose, support you've received or experiences you've had that's really helped you develop the capacity to work as a team coach?
Well, great question. Good friends, good colleagues like yourself supported me in the process. The real push behind that has been supervision. And within that, a reflective process that helps me understand myself and my reaction to what may be going on with the team. So actually I can work with what is going on rather than what is going on for me. I think the other part of it is being empathic in terms of what's it like being in a team. And actually, as we all know, people are not just members of one team. They're usually members of a whole host of teams doing different tasks. They're members of project teams, of virtual teams, of management teams. And beginning to sort of, I suppose, have a sense of actually which teams am I in and what's that like for somebody in actually managing their day, managing their role, managing their process. I think the other final part of it is what it takes into the next part, which is around contracting, is really understanding the fact that in a team environment, the wider sponsor or stakeholder is usually more important because usually they are paying for it, whether that's the team leader, the sponsor, the board, the executive team, whatever they are. And to be really clear about what they want, really clear about how they will measure success, in a sense, what is the business case for the work we're doing? Because the other part of this is you're taking out in a team environment, potentially some of the most influential people in the organization, not just for a few hours, but for a number of days.
Yeah.
And they need to be able to really justify that for themselves in saying, we invest in this piece of work because we recognize it will make a difference. And in terms of that, I'm now quite tough with teams who I'm lucky enough to have the opportunity to work with, in having explained the process to them and what's the same and what's different about team coaching, I will be very clear about, is this something you want to do? And if it is something you want to do, how are you able to really commit to it and to a process that is going to support you? Because it will be challenging. And I then leave it that with them to make a group decision about. Because for me, it's important that people come wanting to learn, wanting to engage in the process. And I'm quite lucky in that environment. I'm aware lots of people who are listening to this may not always be so lucky. They maybe have just be told to go and fix a team. But in that case, contracting is even more important.
So as you're talking about contracting, Chris, why don't we move into that area now? So talk to us a bit about your experiences and what you would say is key in terms of starting to think about a contracting process for working with a group or a team.
Well, I would say again here, there is this just recognition that there is something visible and an awful lot more invisible. There is usually a need or a dysfunction or something that is not occurring. And my experience is most team engagements are often highlighted because something is not working the way that people think they should. I'm sad to say there are not enough occasions where people say, we're already doing a fantastic job and we just want to be better. So it's understanding what that issue, problem, topic is, and having a contracting conversation to actually begin to understand if that's the symptom, what's the cause, what is actually driving that. And beginning to do a bit more future thinking and actually saying, if this was really successful, what would you have? What would be the business case for actually the work being undertaken? What would be the performance improvement, the shift in the way of working, of managing meetings, of being more efficient, that warrants your level of investment in the work we're going to undertake? And I'm probably put more of a consultancy hat on rather than a coaching hat on in some ways in that. We use coaching skills to draw that out. But it is about being quite rigorous in that process and really supporting the sponsor or the team leader begin to work with what is the need. Understanding the outcomes and objectives, the outputs, so that sense of how will you evaluate this. As with all coaching, it can feel sometimes a little bit subjective. So how do you ground it? How will you measure it? Will it be through a psychometric? Will it be through a diagnostic or a 360? Will it be that actually there is recognition that this task just needs to be done faster, quicker, more efficiently over the next 6 months? Being clear exactly about how team coaching will support that. And crucially, what else may be required instead of just seeing team coaching as the answer. My sense is often there's still a slight sort of underpinning with team coaching of bring in the team coach and tell them to fix it, rather than actually encouraging the team to think, what do they need to do differently, but also inviting sometimes the wider organization and the team itself to engage in what may need to shift around them that enables them to be successful. And I think the other part of that is in terms of just unpicking in terms of that idea of the iceberg. So what are the hidden assumptions or expectations that are present? What's present for me? What's present for the client? What's also in the system? What's around this team that actually is going to impact on its ability to work well and effectively and engage in the work you want to do together? And the other part of that is about how you establish your role, how you make clear that actually what is my job here and what is not my job, and build a relationship that is mutually supportive around that. The key part I would just emphasize yet again is understanding the remit of your work and being careful of where team coaching can just slide into almost inviting you to become a consultant from one of the top 3 strategic consultancies and crunch numbers, give them a process, give them ideas that are going to fix it. And being really clear for me, that's not my job. They may need to get that support from somewhere else, but it's identifying that there is a need and actually having it done in order that actually it can support the team coaching process rather than everything being shoved on your shoulders.
So just hearing you talk, Chris, I'm interested in, thinking about your work with, so the leader may be the sponsor or they may be different. So I have two sort of questions for you. One is, how do you land the team coaching program? So in terms of them fully understanding what it will involve. So I suppose preparing the leader for that, but also buying them in. And then I suppose following on from that, what I'd be interested about your experiences of managing that dynamic between, potentially what the sponsor wants the team coaching program to achieve versus what the leader or the team themselves may be telling you. So perhaps if we start with the first one, if that's okay.
Well, in sort of both selling it in and being accepted, the first part of that for me is that there is, as a team coach, I have enough knowledge, enough awareness, I've done the thinking around it to be able to walk into a room and be quite clear about what will make team coaching work and what will actually sabotage the process.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that in myself enough that I can be useful in the conversation. Mixing that with, for me, a very coaching approach, which is coaching the sponsor or the lead in terms of what they want and what they need.
Mm.
I think the final part, though, is at some level something which we will all be familiar with coaches, though it's sometimes seldom spoken, is, are you credible?
Mm.
Do you actually hold a sense where you can hold the empathy, hold the understanding, hold the challenge and the rigor, and that the sponsor becomes interested in thinking, yeah, I can see this person can hold the team. They can challenge the team. They can use a process, but they won't get lost in the process. They'll really help us address and challenge us to look at what we need to challenge. And do you communicate that? Not just in what you say, but how you are. And that credibility for me is often quite important from the sponsor, because they will often be taking a bit of a risk in suggesting that team coaching is something that's going to be useful for the team.
Mm-hmm.
They need to feel that actually you're a safe pair of hands and that you know enough about what you're talking about to be credible and to be effective. Because I'm putting you in front of my team and I'm telling them, yeah, this is the person I've chosen, or I think is good.
Yeah.
And actually, if it's an awful experience, I will probably lose face.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something about being enough, knowing you're enough to do it. I think the second part of it is giving somebody a bit of a template, or at least an idea of what you might do. Team coaching, again, can be huge different ideas of what it entails and what it's not. So some idea from you of what you believe the role of a team coach is, and some overview, however broad it is, on what a team coaching intervention might look like. The contracting process, the first intervention, whether you can do psychometrics or diagnostics, follow on in terms of pre-calls or not pre-calls, follow-on sessions, how you build it towards building the capacity of the team to take responsibility for what it needs to do and to self-learn going forward. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, no, you have, Chris. And I've just seen we had a question come through from David around, what is team coaching in comparison with facilitation? But I know that's something that we will come on and talk a bit more about. So anything more you just want to talk about in terms of the differences between contracting for the team coaching intervention compared to one-to-one?
I think the two things are, there are some dynamics we just touched on, with the individual being the sponsor or team leader. Sometimes that also may be individual members of the team. The team is an entity in itself, so what's the sort of team contract with the organization in terms of final objectives and what you want? That key bit in the middle that it's ongoing. It's not a single contract. It's just like a coaching conversation. The first thing a coach says when you say what you want is probably not what they really want. You will need to allow space in the conversation to be able to revisit it and allow what's the real need to emerge. So in the team coaching, do I allow that in the process to support that happening? The other thing we should perhaps need to include there, which is around it, is contracting with yourself. Accepting and knowing that you have the ability, that you have a real strength in your coaching. Yes, you may need to learn a little bit more about working with teams, but actually really acknowledging what you already know and are already bringing to this, all your experience, but also actually finding some support. So finding a colleague, taking this to supervision, finding something which allows you to feel I am getting a mechanism that allows me to support myself throughout this process. Because for me, that is not only the greatest source of learning, it allows me to keep clean or clear in the work I do with the teams I work with and not being affected by actually all that's going on for them.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, we just had a question come in from Daniel, which I think is relevant for this. When we think about sort of spot contracting as you're in the middle and you're working with the team, he's asked, so what do you do when you identify that there are individuals within the team whose behaviour may be contributing to the challenge or the problem?
So it will slightly depend on where I am with the team. So if I've actually developed a strong relationship with the team, there may be occasions where I can create some humour and some laughter about what's happening. I try not to single individuals out because for most dynamics, unless the team is a bit more mature, that can tend to be exposing. A little technique I sometimes do is I actually get the team to coach itself. So I get people to stand up from wherever they are. I ask them to step back to the side of the room. And then I ask them to do my job, in a sense, of I ask them, if you were observing this team, what would you see going on? What's actually happening for it in this moment? What's it trying to articulate? What's it trying to work with? What are some of the behaviors that are seen? What are some of the energies that are being expressed? Where does it need to move now to be really useful? So it's providing a mechanism by which people can recenter themselves without personally being exposed. The team can give feedback to each other, which is the fundamental thing actually is a capacity we're trying to create, because I'm still trying to make myself redundant. So actually what I want to support the team is that they can trust each other enough if there are behaviors and attitudes which are not helping, is how do they call that for each other rather than me calling it? And how do I get them to a little bit disidentify? So getting them to stand back makes it a bit safer for them to say, well, I think we are doing this. And on occasion, instead of we, I will get someone to say, to own the statement, what am I doing? Mm. Does that give a sort of picture?
Yeah, it does. And I'm just thinking about, obviously it results from how you set the container up with the team. So the contracting you do with them around their psychological contracts, their expectations of each other, how they're going to work together, how they're going to work with you. And then, like you say, bringing in relevant exercises where they can really reflect on the how in terms of what they're doing together and how they're behaving. So as you say, you step away as the intervention progresses. So,
and forgive me if I just jump in. I mean, just building on that, so often as part of the initial process, you'll develop some ways of working for the team. A key part of that is often some of the work I do is live, so I will get a team after the first one or two interventions when they've done some work together about exploring mission, vision, values, task, how they want to work together, is I will get them to run a live meeting or a live board meeting with me observing it. And I will make some interventions in that, and part of that will be asking them to actually sit back and go, so you've got all these lovely words and values on the wall. How well are you doing it? And my experience is the development of the team, that it becomes a bit safer. Some people will still keep in what I call sort of pseudo community or pseudo team. They'll pretend. There's usually one or two who will actually admit we're not doing terribly well in it. And the invitation for that is not to make them, is to create an environment where they don't feel small because of it or exposed because of it, but recognize, gosh, we're not doing it. We need to take more responsibility for how we are working. And I, as an individual, need to take more responsibility for how I'm working. So it's still a matter of raising awareness, calling attention, ask them what they want to do with it. Exactly the same process as you're doing for an individual.
Yeah.
So I cut your flow. Sorry.
No, it's okay. But I did just want to take us to this model, because David's asked, how it differs from facilitation. So I just wondered whether you could talk in terms of this model that we use to try and define team coaching.
Yes. So this came from some work that I did with you and with some old members on the School of Coaching about maybe 10 years ago. And we've developed quite a lot of it since. But it was in trying to investigate about team coaching of what was it. Because there are so many terms buzzing around of team building, team development, team training, facilitation, what differentiates team coaching. So we pulled out a number of elements that we thought were present, and if we start sort of top left, and top right, let's start there, team facilitation. So recognizing there are some engagements that we are often asked to do, which is where there is often a set agenda or a very set outcome. And you're being asked by the leader of the team or the chair or the CEO or the director, please help us get through this process in an effective way and have the conversations we need to have around it. But there is a set agenda, we need to get through it. And you are therefore very much just facilitating a process. What is on the table at some level is already known. Maybe some other things that bubble up, but essentially you are facilitating a process. Going down, team training. This is something which is sometimes for me both formal or less formal. There is absolute training that a team on a new financial or strategic package, learning or understanding a new RACI framework. Also in terms of some of our work, it may be developing some coaching skills in the team or some basic communication teams around listening and feedback. But the team actually understands it's being trained. There are things it doesn't know that it's actually developing and being trained in how to use them better. There's another element which I think has been used, particularly when things were a little less tight financially by lots of organizations, which is around team building and team development. We would call it something about teamness. So it's actually helping people understand that there are real people in the team, not just roles. It's about developing relationship. It's about developing an understanding of actually who this person is, not just the role they play. And an enormous amount of activity that can be done in terms of everything from archery contests to colleagues of mine who used to take executive teams off to the North Pole or down mountainsides or across jungles, which was all about building and developing a team. I think those are fantastic and they can really work. What is often the drawback is that sense of connection that is built in that environment is not correlated with what do you like at work and how does this relate to the task we have at work. So it's ensuring that whatever sense of collaboration or understanding that you have is actually translated to how you operate in the working environment. And it's sometimes that connection is lost. The final part of it was about team learning and just the recognition that in a process of learning together, something else emerges. So building a sense of the team itself that instead of being taught, instead of needing a coach or a trainer or a facilitator, we have a process that actually allows us to build our capacity to learn together and actually begin to embed that. So another company I worked in Germany, automotive, loved the ideas of check-ins. I didn't think they were going to like the idea of checking in with each other how they were. They absolutely realized that it fundamentally shifted the timbre and tone of their meetings. Simply giving every member of the team 1 or 2 minutes just to be present at the beginning of a meeting, tell everybody how they were, what they personally wanted from the meeting. And almost as a process of osmosis, the team meetings became more effective, more present, because people were being more present at them. Also key is they began to involve a sense where at the end of meetings they would review themselves. How did we do in this meeting? What worked, what didn't? It had to be a disciplined process, otherwise you could spend several hours doing it. But actually a constant rhythm of we are engaged in our own team learning process. Mm-hmm. And for us, team coaching was an amalgam of that. It was a sense of actually a contract with a team that said, we are here, we want to get there, and we need your support to actually challenge us to maximize what we bring, maximize these old words which still mean something, our performance, our potential, our learning. And we want to do that in service of something. It might be in service of an organization or a charity, might be to perform in a certain way for a business objective, but there is a wider sense of ownership than just the team that we are providing a benefit to. There you go, there's a bit of a download. How does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. We've had a question come in from Ajibola, which is just really around, when you're working as a team coach, what about one-to-one coaching? Are you often working with the team members of the team on a one-to-one basis at the same time? What's your thoughts around that, Chris?
My answer is yes. So often working one-to-one. I am a little bit careful with it, mainly because of the culture of the organization. So it is situation dependent. Sometimes I will work with the team and the chief exec, sometimes the team and all members of the team. The key part for me is being clear about where there may be leakage for me. So am I centered enough that actually I can coach the team as an entity and not be, I'm going to use the word, polluted by the thoughts of the leader or other members. The other thing for me to be aware of is if I'm coaching the leader of the team and the team, to what level the rest of the team thinks I am simply the mouthpiece of the leader and I'm following an agenda that's going to undermine trust. So wherever possible, actually, I try to just coach the team, and I get some of my colleagues to coach people around it. From that, I will invite them to have a couple of meetings over the course of the program to pull out some key themes, and that is contracted in the one-to-one. No one is going to divulge any confidential information, but if there are any themes emerging which are congruent and which may support the team coaching process, it's a process that come out without breaking confidentiality. But absolutely, for me, individual works hand in hand with team. The thing is just to be a little bit aware of the impact of if you're coaching other people besides the team itself.
Yeah, and and that would all be contracted as well individually in terms of the private and public goals for the one-to-one programs as well.
Absolutely.
Just supporting that boundary. Okay, so we've had another question come in around the use of psychometrics during the team coaching process. So I thought we could look at this next piece really, which is around the Sid Clear model, which comes from Hawkins. So when you're thinking about the approach that you use, Chris, in terms of really supporting the team coaching process, perhaps you just would like to talk through this in terms of your experiences and what's important.
Yeah, so people may be very familiar with Sid Clear, the Sid part put on the front of the Clear model, which Peter Hawkins and Nick Smith devised some time ago. So it goes contracting, inquiry, discovery, then contracting again, listening, exploring, action, and review. The first part, SID, is seen as what you would do with the leader or sponsor of the team, the clear part being what you would do perhaps within the team environment. And I find that a really useful model just to hold your thinking in terms of managing the whole process. If we flip forward, sorry, Damien, onto the SID part.
Just before you do that, Chris, we've just had another question come in around the length of time the usual team coaching program occurs for and how often you'd be meeting the team.
Yeah, so let's deal with that. So the contracting, I'm quite careful with, and that can take, again, purely dependent on the organization and the context. It might take a week or two, it might take a few months. So that's the sort of SID part. In terms of actually a team coaching session, my advice would be, I personally don't believe I can really support a team to map out its agenda and what it's going to do in less than a day. And part of that is not just the outcomes they need, it's actually the fact that they're with together and with each other for a day to actually support their interrelationships, how they're working, get familiar with working with each other for a day. Wherever I can, I try and combine that with some sort of social event. So we often do what we call sort of 24-hour events. Somebody arriving at an off-site location at about 4 o'clock. We do 2 or 3 hours of work. Then we have dinner. They have dinner together. They start again at 8 in the morning, and we finish by 3 or 4, which allows them not to feel they're missing an entire day, but to use the best of it. After that, again, wherever possible, I will push for a full day. And actually, my experience is most mature organizations recognize that's necessary. You're not always going to get that time. So sometimes people will push you, so when you'll need it half a day. I think the part of that is to manage expectations. I think in half a day, I can probably, by the time people are present and by the time people need to go, you've only got about 3 to 4 hours of work. So it isn't actually a huge amount of time for a team process where 6 to 8 individuals all want to express their opinion and need to come to some form of cohesion and collaboration. So in terms of a timeline, we would normally do it over 4 to 6 months. I would think of a minimum of 3 to 4 interventions, probably a single day, hopefully followed by a series of follow-on days. Some of those can be a half day if you need. You need to, in the same way as you do individual coaching, be thinking in the penultimate session, getting them to think about next time is our last session, and beginning to really embed the learning in terms of how you build sustainability. So often my experience is the contract will be increased. They'll want you to keep working with them. Again, it's a time to recontract in terms of what will make this effective, what keeps us rigorous, and what are the new objectives that are going to emerge. Again, ensuring that you don't build dependency, you're actually building capacity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, Chris, what about the SID process? Because, you know, from experience, this is what really drives the success of a team coaching program. And as I said earlier, we had a question around the use of psychometrics that I'd like you to talk into as well. So perhaps if we move on, you can just share some thoughts around setting it up to succeed in terms of your initial phases as a team coach, consulting with the team.
Yes, so I think that first part, which is sort of contracting, so for me it's that initial conversation. It's the initial contracting phase that you would do if you were working individually. For me, though, it's a little bit different, only in terms of you are meeting the sponsor as you would with one-to-one. And there's a real recognition that there are more dynamics at play. So you've got the team, you've got the face and responsibility of the team leader, you've got the sponsor, you've got the wider organization. So we put the idea of gatekeeper there, of you know, who actually allows access to the team. And within that, beginning to build some of the questions we've already posed. What's the business case for this? What's really needed? what's working, how would that be increased, what's not working, what's the consequence of doing nothing, how would you know you succeeded, how will you evaluate it. That inquiry process is beginning to use your coaching skills to underpin it, to try and draw out what's actually underneath the waterline in terms of what is really occurring in this team, and also beginning to understand what's occurring outside the team. So what is it in the cultural context which might be impacting on this team's performance? We've actually changed the last piece, which we used to say diagnostics and diagnosis. And I'm just a little bit wary of diagnosis, only that sometimes it can have a connotation that it might be true. So for us, we've changed that word to discovery. You are undertaking some form of diagnosis, but it is, for me, more of a hypothesis. That, for me, is where some of the psychometrics, diagnostics 360s that you might bring in are best used. The key part for me is being clear about the reason you're using it. So what is my intent? If you're going to use a 360 or something that looks like, we use Insightful Edge to have a look at actually how the team is working against a number of factors: vision and mission, purpose, communication, clarity of role, accountability. That can give you some sort of temperature gauge of where the team thinks it is now, where it needs to be, and essentially a gap analysis in terms of where it wants to focus. What it supports is a greater sense of mutual understanding through discussion, through debate, about the key areas that they need to focus on, and often highlights where there are often huge gaps. Those who think absolutely the vision and mission is clear, those who think it's totally unclear. So it highlights some of what may be going on the team. If you want to use something like MBTI or FAR-OB or any of the other psychometrics, the other part of that for me is being really clear on why am I using it. If it's about helping people understand empathy and that people are different, so you build communication, absolutely fine. Key bit is know the reason you're using it and be clear with your sponsor or your team leader the reason that you use it. If you want to do a 360 or diagnostic, it will give you a common language and may help the development of the team. If you're going to use something more like MBTI, it may do lots of things, but its intent purpose will be to help people understand differences and preferences and the way they work together. We often try and use both. It will slightly depend on budget, slightly depend on how engaged they are in the process, and to recognize there are alternatives. There are different ways of doing it besides doing a diagnostic. Sometimes the key part of that is in reviewing the diagnostic together, the team begins to get into a different type of conversation. And that sometimes is all actually you want. Another download, Damien, is that...
Yeah, no. It's useful. And I suppose the thing to point out, this generally will inform what work you do with the team in the first session in terms of this phase. So we've got a couple of questions that have come through, Chris. I would like to answer before we start to wrap up this initial introductory session. So from Ajibola, we've got a question: would you use an individual 360 assessment or a general climate assessment tool?
I think I tend to use a climate tool, particularly where they provide some clarity on the standard deviation of answers. So as long as that clarity that there are differences in terms of our perspective of whether there is clarity on, as an example, vision or communication or roles, because actually often the key part of the conversation is not always what we want, but actually being clear that actually there is enough alignment within the team that is really what we all want. And that will bring out a part of actually whose voice is perceived to be more important than others. What you're actually looking for is enabling the diagnostic to support an underlying process, which is enabling the team to come to collective decision making, and recognizing that they may need to sometimes push forward their point because it's important, and sometimes actually recognize that there is a group decision which actually goes against them. So there is a parallel process that we're also playing with all of this that hopefully supports the team actually feeling more resourceful, feeling more clear about actually what it needs to focus on, and building a sense of comfort around having some difficult conversations that actually breeds a greater level of openness about what they bring to the table.
Mm. And so when would you choose to use a 360, Chris, over the climate tool?
Well, the only other point for me which is important is I would use it if I can at least more than once. The real danger is 360s and diagnostics are one of the ways you can create some form of evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
So I would often do one right at the beginning. I'd often use that as part of the conversation for the initial coaching intervention. Wherever I could, I'd do it in the middle. So actually there was a sense of both progress or not progress. So actually people could either become more focused or realign their objectives. And I would want to create one at the end, which would be the format for the final session, which would actually set out the agenda for where this team recognizes it needs to focus on going forward.
Yeah.
A comparison of all three will also support the team understanding what some of its habits are.
Mm.
So if there is a recurring thing which they keep saying we want to do that but which doesn't happen, it's enabling them to surface that and begin to build some strategies that enable them to tackle that more effectively over time.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Just to say, in terms of experience, when you're working with a team and trying to build relationships, that sense of trust, asking them to complete an individual 360 exercise, which they will share in the first session, because as you're working together with them, they can give each other feedback on the areas that they've identified, can be, a very powerful intervention that we can make as a team coach as well. But just picking up on this point around diagnosis, and your the way that you alluded to a potential power dynamic that may create. Julie's just asked, are there ever complications where team members start treating you like their line manager? And if so, how do you manage this, Chris?
So yes, I think there's a process that we sometimes think in a sort of psychometric comes from Scott Peck. Talks about what they call pseudo community, when everyone is just pretending, and part of your job is to break that and get them into and through a process of what Scott Peck calls chaos. And the chaos is when actually people are being a bit more open about what is going on.
Yeah.
They'll often find it hugely uncomfortable. It's about engaging in creative conflict. And the often tendency of that is, I don't like it and I want to get out, which is a very natural thing to do. And usually I either want to shoot, metaphorically I hope, either the leader because they supported this process or me because I got them there. So it's being aware of that dynamic about what is occurring. Equally, exactly to the point made, I had to be careful in contracting with the team leader about our respective roles in the work we do. I will often get the team leader or the sponsor to introduce the program, to open the day and close the day, so there is some symbolism in terms of the format. I'm also very careful with the team to, wherever the team is sitting, again symbolically, but also in terms of its impact, I will never sit with the team. I will always sit behind it or stand behind it. I'll get them to actually talk with each other. There's a tendency when I ask a question or a provocative question, they will look at me. I will deliberately say, don't ask the question to me, tell the team. It actually doesn't matter what I think, it matters what they think. I won't always say exactly in that phraseology. But the key part of it is being mindful of your presence, mindful of your impact, and as much as possible get them to talk to each other and with each other and to the leader, not just allow me to completely facilitate the process so I'm the only speaker.
Mm-hmm. And with that point, Chris. Bridget's just asked a question, and we will start wrapping up shortly, but Bridget's just asked a question. So the team coach role seems quite exposed, even with the background support supervision. Is it helpful? And she's said, if so, any examples to undertake team coaching in pairs, or is that likely to cause more complexity and distraction than benefit?
No, I fully, wherever you can, I would work in a pair. I think it's the danger sometimes is only in terms of costing and price, because if the team is relatively small, only 6, they won't always see the need for 2 people. If you get a bit larger, around 8, 9, it's easier to justify. But I absolutely would work in a pair, and even if you're not both in front of the person or the team, metaphorically work in a pair, so you have someone to debrief with. I think actually having 2 people there with you is, as with any development process, is incredibly useful, because what it does is it supports the person who's speaking in picking up actually what you don't always see. As you get more experienced, you see more, but we always miss things, and it's great to have another pair of eyes and someone who you can actually just debrief with.
Thank you, Chris. And and it's something that we often do. So while somebody's running the process, as you say, the other coach will be observing the team and taking that role. So we are going to sort of start to wrap up now. We did have one more question coming around any team diagnostics that we'd recommend. And we do use the Team Performance Accelerator tools as part of our process. So if you look up Team Performance Accelerator tools, you'll see the ones that the performance coach actually use. So Chris, anything you'd just like to say, just to close this session down from your perspective around any final tips that you would just pass on to them?
I think the final few tips is acknowledge what you already know. So from this, I've seen lots of great coaches on the webinar today. So really start with appreciating what you know rather than thinking about what you don't. And translate that process into the team environment with a recognition quietly, kindly, that yes, there is more complexity. And you absolutely have the capacity to do it. Point 2 is contract. Keep contracting. The whole process of contracting actually supports the team to begin to understand what it needs to do, and builds that sense of ownership for actually their own development, rather than the dynamic which is still potentially present is, here is this potential hero coming in as the team coach, coming to fix the problem. And as many team interventions start with a problem, that's the danger. The final tip is don't focus on the problem. Be careful of how you see the team. If you coach their dysfunction, the danger is that you energize it. Coach what actually they want to be, what they aspire to be, all that we know about positive psychology. And if you're going to collude with something, collude with what they can be rather than sometimes what they are expressing.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
So we're just going to move to a close because I'm conscious of running out of time. So if you have enjoyed this, as a bit of an initial introduction to team coaching, we have got a follow-up session on the 21st of March, 12 o'clock UK time, which will be on team coaching again. And it'll be the follow-up where we'll be going a bit more in depth, sharing experiences, approaches, and potentially working with some of the dynamics that play out as well. And obviously we'll make it as interactive as we can at the end of for that session as well. So just to close, really, just be useful for you to just reflect on what you said you wanted to get from the session. And I'd say in your own time following this session, just think about what you have learned in terms of around team coaching, perhaps setting up the initial program, the contracting, and then thinking about what's an action that you're going to take away for yourself as well. So I'd just suggest thinking about those questions when we come to an end. But just to say thanks for dialing in today. I hope you found this a valuable introductory insight into team coaching. As I said at the start of this call, our team coach training program does launch in March this year. So if anybody is interested in finding out more about the training we offer around this field, please feel free to get in contact with any of our open program team, and you can find their contact details on our website. So hopefully see you again soon, and thanks for your time today.